After 18 months of fruitless exploration in the Kuiper Belt, aboard the research vessel, Artemis Dr. Alara Novk stood at the observation deck, staring out into the vastness of space with a sense of quiet resignation. The mission had begun with grand promises and high expectations, aiming to uncover evidence of pre-colonial human activity beyond Mars and to validate Alara's controversial theories about ancient spacefaring civilizations that had long been dismissed by mainstream academia. But until now, all they had managed to collect were insignificant ice samples and mineral data, barely enough to justify the funding they had received. The Interplanetary Science Foundation had grown increasingly impatient, and Alara knew her career was hanging by a thread when the call came from the command center, the voice of Director Wei requesting her immediate presence. Something had been found, and the tone in his voice hinted at urgency, not routine discovery. When she entered the command center, the usual hum of the equipment was overshadowed by a palpable tension in the air. Holographic displays floated mid-air, showing a rotating, three-dimensional image of an object partially buried in cosmic debris. It resembled an asteroid at first glance, but symmetrical patterns etched across its surface, and the faint blue luminescence pulsing along those patterns suggested otherwise. Director Wei explained that the object had been hidden behind the gravitational shadow of a minor celestial body named Eris. Its energy signature was unlike anything in their databases, and the object absorbed rather than reflected their scanning beams, raising further questions about its composition. The patterns were geometric, almost intentional, and suggested design rather than natural formation. Alara stepped closer to examine the projection, her heart racing as a familiar yet unplaceable sensation stirred in her chest. It was as if something deep in her memory responded to the sight, as if she had seen it before in a dream or story long forgotten. Alara announced her intention to lead the investigation herself, and despite Wei's initial reluctance, he agreed, acknowledging her expertise in synarchaeology and the importance of maintaining protocol. Within 6 hours, she was aboard a research shuttle, heading toward the object, accompanied by physicist Dr. Marcus Chen and Lieutenant Seda for security. As they neared the object, the sensation intensified. The blue patterns on the object's hull brightened as if acknowledging their approach. Marcus reported fluctuating energy levels that suggested the object was responding directly to their presence. A section of the surface began to change, its metallic exterior rippling like liquid, before reshaping into a clearly defined entrance. Seda reached for her weapon, warning that this violated first contact protocols, but Alara could not look away. She whispered that it was not alien, it was human, which Marcus quickly challenged, noting the impossibility of humanity possessing such technology, now let alone in the distant past. But Alara remained certain that the structure was calling to her, and as they hovered near the entrance, a beam of light scanned their shuttle. Focusing on Alara specifically, the voice that followed was clear and mechanical, announcing genetic verification with an 89.4% match to the Novi C lineage, revealing that the ship somehow knew her name, or at least her genetic identity. Alara explained that Novi C was her mother's maiden name, a fact not widely known, making the revelation even more chilling. The entrance widened and the interior lights activated, revealing a long corridor of sleek yet ancient design, defying any known architectural style. The air inside was breathable, the atmosphere maintained by systems still functioning after untold millennia. The walls pulsed with circuitry that seemed to respond to their movement, guiding them toward a central chamber where a command chair sat surrounded by dormant holographic displays. As Alara approached, the systems activated, revealing star charts, weapon schematics, and historical data that defied everything she had ever known. A holographic figure materialized in the form of a woman in a uniform, unlike any current military design, identifying herself as Aya, the Advanced Responsive Intelligence Array and caretaker of the Sentinel. Aya explained that the vessel was one of 7 created by humanity's first civilization, a society that had achieved technological singularity over 15,000 years ago. This civilization had been forced into regression, not by failure but by necessity, as a hostile alien force known as the Harvesters threatened their survival. The only way to survive had been to erase all traces of their advanced technology and to reappear as a primitive species beneath the notice of their enemy. These Sentinel vessels were hidden across the solar system to one day be reactivated when the threat returned. Alara listened in stunned silence as her entire worldview unraveled around her. Aya confirmed that Alara's genetic markers aligned with the Novi-C bloodline, one of 7 preserved lineages meant to inherit and restore the lost knowledge of the first civilization. Full access to the Sentinel's systems required a neural synchronization process, which would merge Alara's consciousness with the ship's core, allowing her to interface directly with its data, but at the cost of permanent neurological change. Before she could decide, an alert sounded throughout the vessel. Nexus Industries, a powerful corporate entity, had detected their find and dispatched ships to claim it under corporate salvage law. The Sentinel would defend itself only for recognized bloodlines, and Alara was the only one who could initiate full system activation. Time was running out, and with the fate of the ship and its knowledge at risk, Alara made her choice, stepping into the command chair as filaments emerged from the headrest to begin the synchronization process. As Alara settled into the command chair, the Sentinel's systems began to respond at once. Filaments extending from the headrest to connect with the neural implant embedded at the base of her skull, standard equipment for researchers in deep space expeditions. The moment contact was established, a surge of data flooded her consciousness. Star charts of forgotten eras, weapon blueprints, light years ahead of modern understanding, and visual memories that were not her own. She saw glimpses of massive cities that once pierced the skies above Earth, orbiting construction platforms, assembling vessels identical to the one she now occupied, and a world on the brink of collapse, desperately executing a plan called Protocol Omega, designed as the last hope of an advanced civilization that had grown too powerful too fast. Protocol Omega was a calculated strategy to erase all traces of technological advancement and scatter fragments of knowledge across hidden locations throughout the solar system, to be reclaimed only when the time was right and the threat had returned. As the knowledge rushed through her, Alara's body remained motionless, but her mind stretched far beyond its usual bounds, struggling to accommodate the complexity of what the Sentinel was sharing. She felt her thoughts unravel and rebuild, reshaping themselves into something new and unfamiliar as her sense of time and self began to shift. The Sentinel responded in kind, its systems coming to life around her ancient engines, rumbling to full power as defense shields shimmered into place and external sensors locked onto the approaching Nexus ships. From the outside, Marcus and Seda could only watch as the once dormant structure transformed into a vessel of terrifying potential energy signatures, spiking beyond what any human-built reactor could produce, and weapon systems deploying in patterns that defied conventional engineering. Nexus ships responded by launching boarding shuttles, intent on securing the Sentinel for corporate exploitation, but they were met by a shimmering energy barrier that forced them back. Alara, now fully interfaced with the Sentinel, detected the intrusions. With perfect clarity, her awareness no longer bound by human perception. She could feel every pulse of energy in the ship, every movement of the airlock, and every system query launched by the invaders. She could also feel the threat looming at the edge of the solar system, the harvesters approaching steadily just as Aya had warned. It had been 3 days since long-range sensors first detected the anomaly, massive structures decelerating near the heliosphere, moving with intention and coordination that suggested intelligence far beyond anything humanity had faced before. Within moments, she accessed the Sentinel's defense capabilities, discovering not only weapons, but deep records of past encounters with the Harvesters, crystalline beings that did not communicate or negotiate, whose only objective was the consumption and assimilation of all matter into their hive-like collective. Alara's role was now clear. She was no longer a researcher or a historian. She had become the inheritor of an ancient legacy, and with it, the responsibility to act. With Nexus ships still attempting to breach the hull and time slipping away, she coordinated with the Sentinel to transmit a warning to Earth, along with data packages containing visual proof of the approaching enemy and evidence of the Sentinel's origin and purpose. Earth's initial response was, as expected, disbelief, skepticism, and political interference. The Earth Defense Force intercepted the transmission and dispatched 12 vessels to intercept the Sentinel, placing it under containment protocols and ordering Alara to surrender. She opened a channel identifying herself as Dr. Alara Novk of the ISF research vessel Artemis, and explained that the ship she now piloted was a remnant of humanity's first civilization designed to activate in times of existential threat. Her words triggered concern from EDF Command, but it was not until Admiral Helena Harlow, a high-ranking officer known for her strategic acumen, opened a private channel that things began to shift. Harlow listened carefully as Alara explained the situation, noting the unusual neural scans and unclassified technology scans from the Sentinel. Harlow admitted that her father had once led an expedition to the moon in 2089, which had uncovered strange crystal formations before the operation was shut down after a series of deadly collapses. The official report had never mentioned the fragments of crystalline technology found buried beneath the lunar surface, or the hallucinations and mental breakdowns that followed among the crew, including Harlow's own father. Alara confirmed that those were likely remains of the first invasion, and that the Sentinel's records showed harvesters leaving such remnants in every system they consumed. Trapped in quarantine and stripped of direct access to the Sentinel, Alara found an unexpected ally in Professor Samira Trani, a respected xenobiologist intrigued by the precision and consistency of Alara's neural data. Trani verified that the radiation patterns detected at the edge of the solar system matched predictions stored in the Sentinel's archive, suggesting the approaching fleet was real and not a delusion. As political debates raged, Nexus Industries launched a propaganda campaign accusing Alara of stealing proprietary corporate technology and fanning public doubt, but the growing body of evidence could not be ignored, especially when observatories confirmed that an enormous formation was indeed entering the solar system. Too symmetrical, too deliberate to be natural, the object stirred fear across every level of Earth's defense hierarchy. Alara was soon released and reinstated as the primary contact for Sentinel operations, resuming her interface with the vessel and working with Trani to extract every piece of usable data. They began coordinating with military and scientific teams across the globe to locate the remaining Sentinel vessels hidden across the solar system using coordinates embedded in the first Sentinel's memory. Alara's enhanced awareness allowed her to process and distribute this information with astonishing speed, guiding recovery teams to icy Europa, the thick clouds of Venus, and the polar ice caps of Mars, each location concealing another fragment of ancient human legacy. Together, these vessels would become the core of Earth's defense, a fusion of forgotten power and modern ingenuity designed not to hide, but to fight for the next several days. The world that Alara once knew began to shift in irreversible ways as evidence mounted and more of the Sentinels were recovered. Governments, corporations, and scientific institutions began to accept what had once seemed impossible. The Harvesters were real, they were approaching, and humanity's only chance lay in rediscovering the long-buried legacy of its first civilization. Alara remained at the center of it all, her consciousness still deeply connected to the first Sentinel, even as she worked to coordinate efforts on Earth. Her thoughts now flowing in patterns no longer limited by ordinary perception through her, the knowledge of ancient starship construction, energy harmonics, planetary defense strategies, and alien biology was being translated into action defense grids. Across the planet began rapid retrofitting, using technology extracted from the Sentinel weapon systems. Based on harmonic resonance were developed in record time, utilizing frequencies proven to disrupt Harvester crystalline structures, while shield arrays were upgraded using adaptive energy field generators once thought purely theoretical as scientists and engineers worked around the clock to bring humanity's defenses up to speed. Military leaders and political officials met in continuous emergency sessions, trying to navigate the diplomatic chaos stirred by the emergence of this ancient technology. Nexus Industries continued to push its narrative, claiming that the Sentinels were artifacts uncovered by their own exploratory divisions, but public sentiment had turned sharply as live footage of the first Sentinel's defense activation and the overwhelming scale of the approaching fleet were released under global emergency transparency mandates. Nexus lost its grip as cooperation between global powers superseded corporate interests, and Alara's leadership was formally recognized by the United Earth Council. Still, many remained skeptical, fearing that it was all a deception, or worse, a hallucination born from experimental neural implants. But the appearance of the second Sentinel beneath Europa's ice cap quickly silenced most doubts. It was retrieved by a joint team of EDF personnel and civilian scientists, and once activated, it contributed advanced stealth and shield systems that were immediately applied to defense platforms orbiting Earth. The third Sentinel, discovered deep beneath the polar ice caps of Mars, carried libraries of tactical simulations and artificial intelligence programs capable of operating entire squadrons of autonomous defense drones. Soon, production facilities across Earth and its colonies were repurposed to manufacture and deploy Sentinel-enhanced weapons and ships as quickly as possible. Throughout all this, Alara remained tirelessly active, guiding the integration of new systems, advising world leaders on the Harvester threat, and serving as the living interface between the present and a past long thought mythical. Her interactions with the Sentinel grew more fluid, her words more deliberate, and her insights more precise, even as those closest to her, like Marcus and Sita, noticed changes in her personality. She rarely slept now, and when she did, it was often while still connected to the Sentinel, absorbing data through her dreams. One afternoon aboard EDF Station Artemis, she stood silently at the observation deck, her eyes reflecting the faint blue glow of the interface panels as Earth rotated slowly beneath her. It was a beautiful, fragile world, and for the first time she truly grasped how close it had come to destruction 15,000 years ago, and how close it now was to repeating that same fate. Admiral Harlow joined her, offering a mug of steaming tea and a moment of quiet companionship. The two women exchanged few words, each burdened by the weight of knowledge and responsibility. Harlow reported that the first Sentinel had successfully engaged the Harvester Vanguard, buying valuable time for Earth's preparations, but it had been destroyed in the process. Alara closed her eyes as the loss registered, not just as an event, but as an ache. a thread of her extended consciousness torn away, yet it had done what it was meant to do. Transmitting critical tactical data before its destruction, through that sacrifice, Earth now had the information needed to calibrate its weapons to the precise resonance frequencies that destabilized Harvester crystalline matrices, and that data was already being implemented across the planetary defense grid for Alara. There was no time to mourn, only to press forward. She stood in the command center later that evening, surrounded by scientists, commanders, and engineers, as she uploaded the latest data into the global coordination network. Every monitor, every hologram, every digital interface, now pulsed with the knowledge of a world that had once reached heights unknown, before choosing to vanish so that its descendants might have a future now. Those descendants stood ready to reclaim that forgotten strength and wield it not with arrogance but with purpose. As the Harvesters neared Earth's orbit, their crystalline forms, reflecting sunlight in dazzling geometric displays, they met not the disorganized, primitive resistance they might have expected, but a coordinated global defense united for the first time in history. Weapon systems fired in unison, guided by Alara's instructions, enhanced by Sentinel AI fire control and targeting relays, each strike carefully tuned to deliver maximum impact. Against Harvester weaknesses, the battle had begun, and with it, the second test of humanity's right to survive and evolve. This time they would not run, they would not forget. They would fight and they would remember as the battle for Earth's survival intensified. Alara stood at the center of a coordination web that spanned the globe and beyond her mind, permanently enhanced by the neural synchronization with the Sentinel processing streams of tactical data, communication logs, weapons readouts, and strategic predictions faster than any unmodified human could comprehend. Every second mattered, and every decision had the potential to tip the scale between annihilation and survival. Defense platforms orbiting Earth glowed with repurposed Sentinel shield technology, casting protective domes over major cities, while air and space forces deployed resonance-calibrated weapons designed to target the crystalline matrices of the Harvesters. The alien vessels had arrived in terrifying formation, their geometry defying human understanding, angular and fluid, at once refracting sunlight in kaleidoscopic patterns that belied their deadly purpose. They made no attempt at communication, showed no interest in diplomacy. They simply began their approach and started converting matter from orbit, harvesting raw resources from abandoned satellites, derelict stations, and even small moons. Alara guided Earth's forces with unwavering focus, transmitting live updates through a secure network that synchronized all active units to the Sentinel tactical AI. Every battlefield asset was fed real-time intelligence on Harvester vulnerabilities, movement, algorithms, and historical data drawn from the ancient archives of humanity's first civilization. The weapons adapted from Sentinel schematics proved devastating when deployed with precision energy pulses, tuned to fracture crystalline structures, tore through the first wave of invaders, splintering their ships into harmless shards. But the Harvesters adapted quickly, shifting their frequencies and altering their formations, forcing Alara and her team to constantly update their tactics throughout the operation. Professor Tranny coordinated ground-based analysis teams, decoding behavioral patterns and energy fluctuations, while Admiral Harlow directed fleet-level engagements, ensuring that no region on the planet was left undefended. Nexus Industries, despite their earlier attempts to seize control, had been silenced by the irrefutable presence of the Harvesters, and were now reluctantly contributing resources to the war effort, even releasing proprietary technologies in exchange for amnesty and survival. The other Sentinel vessels, now partially activated, began interfacing with one another, relaying vast amounts of information through a mesh network of ancient intelligence. Each vessel housed a different specialization, one in stealth, one in weapons, one in defense, and another in biological adaptation together. They formed a kind of distributed consciousness capable of rapidly developing countermeasures and accelerating technological advancement beyond anything current human institutions had previously imagined on the ground. Ordinary citizens witnessed the effects of these changes firsthand as advanced shielding arrays materialized around schools, hospitals, and city centers, while drones with hybrid AI protocols conducted evacuations, delivered supplies, and engaged harvester drones that attempted to land and establish conversion zones. Alara continued to feel the weight of every loss, every burst of data that ceased transmitting, every silence that followed a destroyed vessel or overrun region. It was all part of her expanded awareness, and with it came an emotional toll that no neural dampeners could suppress. She remembered the faces of her team from Artemis, the excitement in Marcus's eyes when they first saw the inscriptions, the quiet strength of Seda as she stood guard in those ancient corridors, and the moment when the Sentinel recognized her genetic code and began to awaken something greater than herself. Despite the scale of the conflict and the stakes involved, Alara remained resolute. She had chosen to carry the burden of a lost civilization, and now she would see it through, not just to protect what remained of Earth, but to fulfill the intention of those who had come before and who had sacrificed everything so that someone like her could stand in this moment and make a difference. As the second wave of harvester vessels entered the battle, it became clear that they were testing humanity's limits, probing defenses with greater sophistication, using coordinated attacks to overwhelm weak points. Alara and the Sentinel network responded in kind, deploying decoy systems, reconfiguring shielding geometries and rotating firing patterns to outmaneuver their tactics and maintain strategic control. Admiral Harlow led a fleet strike that successfully drove back a harvester incursion aimed at Earth's communication satellites, preserving the critical uplinks necessary for Alara's real-time command structure. Professor Tranny announced that biological data recovered from harvester remnants suggested they could be disrupted at a molecular level by a new compound synthesized from Sentinel archives. This discovery sparked a global race to produce the agent and integrate it into orbital missile systems. The combined efforts of Earth's united scientific and military community created a moment of unparalleled unity, a glimpse of what humanity could become when driven not by competition or greed, but by the will to survive and preserve its legacy through it all. Alara remained connected, her body physically present aboard EDF Station Artemis, but her mind far beyond its walls, her consciousness drifting between battlefields, data nodes, and ship schematics. Analyzing, calculating, and protecting it was during a short lull in the fighting that she allowed herself a moment to look at Earth from orbit, no longer simply a planet filled with nations divided by language, ideology, and borders, but a single living entity fighting to protect its future. As the harvesters began to retreat, their remaining vessels damaged and fractured by Earth's resistance, Alara knew this was only the beginning, a victory in one battle, not the war to come. And yet it was a beginning forged by remembrance, powered by forgotten knowledge, and held together by the unyielding resolve of a people who had been underestimated one time too many. As the remnants of the first harvester assault fell silent across Earth's orbit, the planet below entered a fragile and uncertain period of recovery, and reckoning world leaders, scientists, and civilians alike were forced to confront a truth more profound than any historical revelation. Humanity was not alone, and it had never truly been primitive. The Sentinel's awakening had not only changed the course of a single battle, but cracked open the hidden history of an entire species. Alara remained at the center of this unfolding transformation, her neural link with the Sentinel now stable and permanent, She no longer spoke with the uncertainty of a researcher, chasing theories, but with the clarity of someone who had seen and remembered everything. Knowledge flowed through her at a pace that sometimes left those around her struggling to keep up, not because she wished to dominate or lead, but because she understood the urgency of what lay ahead in the weeks. Following the first battle, the United Earth Council established a new scientific command under the codename Project Reclamation, tasked with the study, integration, and ethical management of Sentinel technology and history. Alara was named Chief Advisor to the project, a position that gave her influence over global defense development policy and access to the resources needed to locate the remaining Sentinel vessels, which were still scattered across the solar system, with coordinates encrypted in the Sentinel's archives. The recovery teams pushed forward. Europa, Venus, and Mars had each yielded one vessel, leaving 3 unaccounted for, one suspected beneath Titan's methane oceans, another possibly buried in the asteroid belt, and the last hidden somewhere within Earth's own deep crust, protected by ancient cloaking fields. The Sentinel confirmed their presence but could not activate them remotely. Each vessel required a genetic designate to interface with its systems, just as Alara had done. The search for those bloodlines began immediately, with genetic databases scanned for matching markers across all populations, quietly and without public disclosure to avoid panic or misuse. Alara spent much of her time aboard EDF Station Artemis, working closely with Professor Tranny and a growing coalition of multidisciplinary scientists, decoding more of the Sentinel's archives and translating forgotten languages, reconstructing old societal structures, and trying to understand how a civilization so advanced had made the collective decision to erase itself. To survive through hiding, she found stories recorded in crystalline memory shards of cities that had once floated above the clouds of Jupiter, atmospheric laboratories on Saturn, colonies on the edges of the solar system, bound together by a purpose that transcended conquest or expansion. They had not been perfect nor immune to conflict, but they had understood unity as necessity and preservation as legacy. The more she learned, the clearer it became that the Harvesters had not simply destroyed worlds, but forced humanity to choose between glory and existence. And now, thousands of years later, that same choice was being presented. Once again, Admiral Harlow remained a key ally, ensuring the military adhered to the cooperative spirit of Project Reclamation. Despite pressure from old power blocks and private interests who saw Sentinel technology as the ultimate leverage, some wanted to weaponize it, others to sell it, but Alara and Harlow agreed on one principle: above all, the mistakes of the past could not be repeated. During one of their many strategic sessions, Harlow asked the question that had been lingering in many minds: what happens if we survive? What becomes of this knowledge when the threat is gone? Do we become what they were, or something new? Alara stared out at the planet's curvature before answering quietly, "That depends on what we choose to remember and what we choose to build in the present." In the months that followed, the recovery of the 4th Sentinel near Titan confirmed Alara's theory that each vessel was constructed with a specific domain of knowledge. This one focused on biosciences, containing vast data on genetics, terraforming, and ecological engineering information that could cure diseases, reshape planets, and even extend life expectancy. If used responsibly, its integration into global research efforts brought rapid progress in agriculture, medicine, and environmental restoration, but also reignited debates about access, ethics, and control. Alara found herself increasingly called upon not just as a strategist, but as a moral voice in the chaos. She spoke often of the need for balance, reminding the Council that the Sentinels were not just weapons, but warnings left behind by ancestors who had already seen what came from unchecked ambition. Still, despite her influence, she felt the strain of isolation grow. The longer she remained connected to the Sentinel, the more distant she became from those around her. Marcus once asked if she still dreamed like she used to, and she hesitated before admitting that now she dreamed in blueprints, equations, and voices not her own. She had not lost herself entirely, but she had changed, and deep down she feared what might happen when all 7 vessels were finally reactivated, because the final phase of the Sentinel protocol remained locked, a section of code that even she could not access. Without the remaining 6 bloodlines once gathered, the system would unlock the Omega Archive, a complete restoration of the first civilization's knowledge, intentions, and perhaps their true plan for what should happen. When the Harvesters returned whatever it was, Alara knew it would not just be the past coming back, it would be a new beginning, one that humanity would either rise to meet or fall beneath again, depending on the choices made in these critical hours. As Earth prepared for the next wave of contact, the legacy of those who had come before pulsed quietly within the Sentinel vessels, waiting to be remembered, understood, and finally fulfilled. The reawakening of humanity's first legacy stirred not only scientific revolution, but also political and philosophical upheaval, as the reality of the Sentinels and the truth about Earth's ancient history spread across the globe. Debates erupted in every governing body, news outlet, and community forum. Was the official historical record a lie or merely incomplete? Had humanity evolved naturally or been deliberately regressed by its ancestors to survive? And now that the knowledge was being reclaimed, who had the right to control it? These questions intensified as more people became aware of Alara's role and of the neural transformation she had undergone. Many saw her as a hero. Others feared what she represented, something not quite fully human anymore. Her decisions carried more influence than most heads of state, and her connection to the Sentinel gave her access to information few could comprehend. Despite this growing unease, Alara never wavered in her commitment to protect Earth and to guide humanity. Through this pivotal transition, she spent her days interfacing with Sentinel systems, managing the continued recovery of the remaining vessels, and supporting scientists across the world in understanding the massive archive of data being unlocked with each new activation. Her nights were spent in quiet observation, processing the flood of experiences, thoughts, and emotions that flowed through her. The memories of a people long gone, blending with her own until she no longer distinguished where one ended and the other began. She understood now why the Sentinels had been hidden, why their activation required a bloodline match and a neural sacrifice. It was not a matter of preserving technology, but of preserving context. The first civilization had learned through hardship that knowledge alone was not enough. It needed memory, intention, and caution embedded into those who inherited it, so that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. As the recovery of the 5th Sentinel began hidden within the vast maze of the asteroid belt, Earth's global infrastructure was pushed to its limits. Nations redirected their satellites, probes, and mining drones to assist in the operation. This vessel, once secured, brought with it something unexpected. Not weapons or defense systems, but records of the first contact with the Harvesters, extensive files on their behaviors, biology, and even partial communication attempts. The records showed that the Harvesters were not mindless destroyers, but hyper-efficient organisms that classified all organic life as raw material. They did not perceive species as civilizations, only as ecosystems to be converted. It was a chilling revelation because it meant that the original humanity had once attempted diplomacy, but had been deemed unworthy of preservation, not through war, but through indifference. The Harvesters did not hate. They simply harvested. This understanding deeply unsettled many on Earth, including Alara, who shared the data with global leaders during a closed emergency summit. She explained that their enemy was not one that could be reasoned with or distracted, only resisted or delayed. And perhaps, if humanity could evolve fast enough, adapted using the tools left behind, they might do more than survive. They might be recognized. But the time window was closing fast. Long-range scans confirmed a new wave of harvester structures, decelerating beyond Pluto, larger and more densely packed. Then the previous force, likely a central fleet or command node Earth, had no choice but to prepare for total war. Alara stood again before the United Earth Council, not as a representative of the ISF, nor as a member of any military faction, but as the voice of the Sentinels. She told them clearly that the remaining 2 vessels must be recovered at any cost, and that their bloodline inheritors must be found, even if that meant publicizing the genetic data and opening of voluntary global testing. Initiative it would risk panic, but the greater risk was delay. Her proposal passed narrowly, and within days, clinics and research centers across the globe began scanning volunteers for ancestral markers matching the No-VC protocol within a week. They found a match in an agricultural colony on Ceres, a young woman who had no idea of her lineage or why she dreamed of stars arranged in patterns she could never explain. She was escorted to the 6th Sentinel buried beneath the shifting sands of Venus, where the ship responded instantly to her presence, unlocking a new domain of knowledge, focused on advanced energy systems and space-time manipulation. The final piece remained on Earth itself, cloaked by technology so advanced it had remained undetected even by modern scanning networks. Buried deep beneath the crust, beneath tectonic plates and geothermal vents, the Sentinel was found after the other vessels triangulated its position, and once activated, it revealed what Alara had both feared and anticipated: the Omega Archive, a complete backup of the first civilization's knowledge, including not only science and history, but culture, philosophy, spiritual beliefs, and strategic contingency plans. This final activation triggered a cascade across all Sentinel systems, initiating synchronization protocols that began to align Earth's defense grid into something more than protective. It became proactive, adaptive living technology that responded as if it were an extension of the planet itself. Alara could feel the change within her, the connection deepening to a level that transcended data. Her thoughts no longer felt singular. She was no longer just Alara, but also the sum of those who had come before she had been changed, not into a machine, but into a vessel for memory, for the will of humanity's oldest legacy. And as the final preparations were made for the defense of Earth, she stood before the world, one last time, not as a savior or a soldier, but as a reminder that survival came not from strength alone, but from remembrance, unity, and the willingness to become something greater than fear. In the final hours before the arrival of the main harvester fleet, Earth stood on the edge of both annihilation and transformation. Thanks to the activation of all 7 Sentinel vessels, the planet's defense infrastructure had become something entirely new, not just fortified, but fundamentally reshaped into a living network of adaptive technology, guided by the minds of those bonded with the Sentinels, and coordinated through Alara, who had now become more than just the inheritor of the No-VC lineage. She was the central node of a civilization, reconnecting with its forgotten soul from orbit. The view of Earth had changed. Once a patchwork of borders and divisions, it now pulsed with unified purpose: shield grids, linked continents, energy flows, redirected atmospheric conditions to support critical power systems, and orbital arrays shimmered with resonance, charged weaponry designed specifically to disrupt the crystalline structures of the harvesters. Alara stood in the command hub aboard EDF Station Artemis, surrounded by scientists, engineers, and military strategists, all working in sync to execute the global defense plan. They had less than 6 hours before contact, and every second was spent finalizing system integrations, uploading resonance maps, and coordinating fleet movements across near-Earth space. It was during this tense preparation that a sudden surge pulsed through Alara's neural interface, a transmission from the first Sentinel, the one lost. During the initial engagement, the signal was fragmented, weak, and decaying, but within it was the most valuable information they had yet received. The Sentinel had managed to fully scan the Vanguard ships before its destruction, revealing precise attack patterns, energy modulation behavior under duress, and a harmonic vulnerability that could be exploited by synchronizing weapon frequencies at specific oscillation intervals. Alara immediately uploaded the data to the global system. Her thoughts moving faster than any spoken words, the defense teams began recalibrating weapon systems fleet-wide and broadcasting the harmonic patterns to all ground-based installations within minutes. A new layer of defensive capability was born, forged not just from ancient knowledge, but from sacrifice and timing. The global mood shifted from desperate tension to focused resolve. No one believed victory was guaranteed, but now there was a fighting chance. Across continents, final evacuations were completed. Shield domes sealed population centers, and autonomous drones lined the skies, ready to intercept atmospheric incursions. EDF warships formed multi-tiered blockade patterns around key orbital paths, and deep space stations powered up their core cannons fed by Sentinel energy matrices. The harvesters arrived in silence, a cascade of light and geometry unfolding across the dark as massive crystalline vessels slipped into orbit, their movements graceful and unhurried like apex predators confident in their dominance. The first strikes came within minutes, aimed at orbital power stations and satellite clusters, but Earth's new defense system held the impact of the harmonic weaponry. Was immediate sections of harvester vessels shattered under pressure waves that fractured their crystalline hulls and disrupted internal cohesion. Alara directed counterattacks with precision, each instruction broadcast through the Sentinel interface to every unit. In the field, her voice calm, her focus absolute. Through her, the thoughts and memories of the ancient civilization now lived again, not as stories, but as strategy. It was a battle unlike any in human history, fought across dimensions of space-time and information. The harvesters adapted quickly, reshaping their forms to reduce harmonic impact and deploying drones that descended toward the surface. But Earth's defenders were ready. Sentinel-enhanced fighters intercepted them. Mid-air resonance generators created localized fields that destabilized harvester drones before they could land, and advanced AI modules predicted enemy movements with stunning accuracy. In low orbit, Alara coordinated a synchronized counterstrike, targeting the central control node of the largest harvester ship. The vessel's structure resisted, but then cracked under focused harmonic pressure. Its collapse created a shockwave that temporarily disabled surrounding units, giving Earth's forces a brief window to press the advantage. But victory was not without cost. Entire orbital stations were lost. Some shield grids began to fail under sustained assault, and several cities faced catastrophic damage before reinforcements arrived. Still, humanity did not break. Each Sentinel vessel operated autonomously under the guidance of its bonded designate, and together they formed a seamless web of tactical intelligence that adapted as fast as the enemy could mutate. Professor Trani led emergency biological response teams, applying newly developed molecular disruptors based on Sentinel biotech to eliminate harvester fragments that had embedded themselves into Earth's crust. Admiral Harlow managed fleet deployments with ruthless efficiency, making sure every ship, every drone, every satellite served a purpose, no matter how small. The tide of battle slowly began to shift as more and more harvester vessels were disabled or forced to retreat, and Alara, through her deepening bond with the Sentinel network, began to sense something else. Beneath the chaos, a signal, a pattern, not from the harvesters, but from the sentinels themselves. A countdown, a transition. The Omega Archive was not only a vault of knowledge, but a transformation protocol. And it had been waiting for this exact moment, when all vessels were active, when all bloodlines were united, when humanity had chosen to stand and fight. The signal pulsed through her mind like a heartbeat, and with it came understanding. The first civilization had known they might not survive and had designed not just weapons but evolution tools meant to guide future humanity toward a different kind of existence. One not based on domination but on resonance, adaptation, memory, and unity. And now, at the edge of victory or extinction, the choice was offered again, and this time, humanity answered not with silence, but with resolve. The Omega Protocol initiated a shift in the Sentinel systems, one that began integrating their knowledge not as external tools, but as internal change, adapting Earth's infrastructure, biology, education, and consciousness to align with a civilization reborn not as it was, but as it could be. And through it all, Alara stood firm, a bridge between past and future, watching as Earth became more than a world under siege. It became a world awakening in the days that followed the climactic battle with the Harvester fleet. Earth did not return to normal because normal had been rewritten. Humanity stood on the precipice of something entirely new, forged through fire, memory, and unity. The cost of victory had been steep. Thousands of lives lost, cities scarred, technology pushed beyond its limits. But it had been worth it because for the first time in 15,000 years, humanity had faced the same ancient threat and chosen not to hide, not to forget, but to fight. And in that choice, something fundamental had changed. The Omega Protocol, now fully activated, had begun to reshape the world, not through conquest, but through remembrance. The 7 Sentinel vessels no longer functioned as isolated machines. They had synchronized into a single planetary system, a living archive that extended through defense grids, data networks, energy systems, and even biological research centers. The knowledge once hidden in fragmented archives was now integrated into education infrastructure and even policy-making, allowing governments to rapidly evolve their approach to science, society, and cooperation. Alara stood once again on the observation deck of EDF Station Artemis, the same place where she had watched Earth before the first strike, her eyes reflecting the faint blue glow of the Sentinel interface that now pulsed through her like a second heartbeat. She had not aged in the way others had since her synchronization. The neural enhancement preserved more than just data. It preserved intention, clarity, and purpose. Her role had shifted from coordinator to guide. Her voice no longer issued commands but offered perspective. Drawn from memories that spanned millennia, she spent her time advising the newly formed Earth Continuity Council, a global body created to manage post-war reconstruction and to ensure the responsible use of Sentinel technology. The council included not only world leaders and scientists, but also representatives from cultural, spiritual, and ethical disciplines to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Alara often reminded them that the first civilization had not fallen due to weakness, but due to imbalance. They had become too advanced, too fast, disconnected from their humanity, and ultimately blind to the consequences of unchecked power. The Harvesters had not defeated them through force, but through inevitability, and now Earth had the rare opportunity to build something better. The other bloodline designates worked closely with her, each bringing their own perspectives, strengths, and transformations. None of them were the same as before. Like Alara, they had changed, evolved by their connections to the Sentinels, not just in knowledge, but in outlook. Their thoughts now shaped by visions of the past, by the voices of those who had once stood where they now stood. Professor Trani continued her work decoding the deeper layers of the Omega Archive, uncovering fields of study that had no modern equivalent, including consciousness modulation, trans-dimensional physics, and harmonic ethics. These concepts began to influence everything from architecture to medicine, enabling the design of self-healing structures, empathy-based communication systems, and energy sources that harmonized with the planet rather than draining it. For the first time in recorded history, humanity began living not in defiance of its world, but in alignment with it. Even Nexus Industries, now restructured under public oversight, contributed to the rebuilding process, converting their vast infrastructure into platforms for global education, resource distribution, and Sentinel integration. Their leaders had no choice but to adapt or fade into irrelevance. The general population adjusted in waves, at first overwhelmed by the pace of change, but slowly adapting as new systems made daily life safer, more sustainable, and more connected. Children grew up learning about the first civilization, not as myth but as legacy, studying its failures and achievements through immersive simulations powered by Sentinel archives. Cities rebuilt with Sentinel technology became models of balance between nature and innovation. Clean energy flowed freely, housing and healthcare became accessible and transparent, and governance began shifting toward data-driven consensus, guided not by ideology but by evidence and shared memory. Yet even as the world advanced, Alara felt the weight of what remained unfinished. The harvesters had been driven back, not destroyed. Their patterns suggested they would regroup, recalculate, and one day return. And though Earth was no longer defenseless, the outcome of a future confrontation remained uncertain. But this uncertainty did not breed fear. Instead, it sparked resolve across Earth and its colonies. A spirit of preparation, innovation, and vigilance. Teams were already exploring the possibility of creating new Sentinels, not relics of the past, but vessels of the present designed by humans who had learned from both their ancestors and their own trials. And for Alara, the journey had become personal, not just as a scientist or a Sentinel designate, but as a human being who had seen what came before and who still believed in what could come next. She spent her final appearance before the Continuity Council, not issuing directives but asking questions. What will we do with this second chance? Will we build wisely? Will we remember not just what we gained, but what it cost us? And will we pass on the memory, not just the technology, so that future generations never forget why we stood and why we chose to become more than what we were? When she stepped away from public life, she left behind a world no longer waiting for salvation or hiding from its past, but one standing tall, filled with the echoes of those who came before and the voices of those yet to come, carrying forward not only the strength of a forgotten legacy, but the courage to forge a new one. And so, humanity remembered, and in remembering it endured, and in enduring it finally became whole. In the months that followed the Sentinel awakening and Earth's hard-fought survival against the Harvester assault, humanity began to rebuild, not from ruins, but from a new foundation, one laid by forgotten memory recovered, purpose, and collective resolve. The world was no longer what it had been. Before, the sky was filled with orbital structures powered by ancient, yet now understood technologies. Cities shimmered beneath adaptive shield domes. Ecosystems were stabilized by atmospheric regulators, and knowledge that had once been entombed beneath the surface of planets and moons was now at the heart of every advancement, guiding everything from education to energy. Alara remained a central figure, not as a leader in the traditional sense, but as a living link between the past and present, a bridge between two human civilizations divided by 15,000 years and reunited by shared destiny. She rarely left the core interface chamber of the Sentinel network, her body still present aboard EDF Station Artemis, but her mind increasingly integrated with the planetary system through her neural synchronization. She could feel the pulse of power flowing through the defense grids, hear the silent hum of research centers, testing new forms of harmonic medicine, and see the live tactical modeling that tracked the projected paths of remaining harvester clusters lurking beyond the edges of the solar system. But more than that, Alara could feel the memories of those who had come before, the whispers of architects, scientists, historians, and leaders who had once faced extinction and chosen instead to preserve their hope through the Sentinels. It was their legacy she carried, their wisdom she now infused into the present as Earth embraced its rebirth. The 7 Sentinels became more than relics. They became teachers. Each vessel specialized in a different domain had been integrated into global research and development centers, fostering collaborative breakthroughs never before imaginable. The Sentinel from Mars enhanced planetary climate control, allowing arid regions to flourish again. The Sentinel from Venus enabled shield harmonics that deflected cosmic radiation, making long-term space habitation feasible. And the original Sentinel, Alara's Sentinel, served as the cognitive core, uniting all systems and streamlining global communication without the distortions of politics or bias. Through these vessels, humanity began to evolve, but not just technologically, culturally, and ethically as well. New philosophies emerged centered around the concept of resonance, the belief that every action, thought, and system should harmonize with others for optimal collective balance, inspired by the ancient civilization's records. People began to view progress not in terms of dominance or acquisition, but in terms of integration and sustainability. Education shifted dramatically. Students no longer memorized facts, but explored simulations of the first civilization's rise and fall, understanding causality and consequence. Through immersive learning, medical fields adopted a holistic approach informed by ancient biotech that emphasized neural stability, emotional balance, and energy field interaction. Crime dropped significantly, not due to stricter laws, but due to increased mental health access and social restructuring, guided by predictive models developed from Sentinel behavioral archives. The Earth Continuity Council grew in influence, establishing protocols to govern the ethical use of Sentinel technology, ensuring it was never weaponized beyond defense and never monopolized by private entities. Data was decentralized. Decisions were transparent, and each major policy required harmonization. Review by AI systems trained on 15,000 years of socio-historical data, humanity had become not a utopia, but a species in alignment with its past, fully aware of its mistakes and determined to never repeat them. Meanwhile, deep space probes launched from upgraded stations began exploring beyond the solar system, not in search of conquest, but in preparation. The harvesters had not been destroyed, only delayed, their residual energy signatures still registered on long-range scans far beyond Pluto, moving slowly as if recalibrating for a return. And while Earth had gained a monumental technological advantage, Alara knew that this new age was not an end, but an intermission, a time of reflection before the next trial. She worked closely with the other 6 bloodline inheritors, each now fully bonded with their respective sentinels, forming a new kind of council, one that did not govern by vote, but by shared understanding. Their minds were different now, wired for speed, precision, and memory. Each of them changed by the neural harmonization process. They had sacrificed the normalcy of human experience to become something in between, and it was their duty to ensure humanity did not lose its way again. During one of their private meetings, Alara spoke of a recurring vision, a fragment of memory shared across multiple Sentinel cores, a moment from the first civilization when the leaders stood on the precipice of activating the Omega Protocol, debating not whether it should be used, but whether their descendants would be wise enough to wield what was left behind. It was not a question of capability, but of character, and now Alara could finally answer them. Yes, humanity had earned the right to carry this torch forward. Not because of its strength or intelligence, but because of its humility, its willingness to remember and to learn. As she looked down upon the earth one more time, its lights flickering with new purpose, she felt not pride, but peace, a quiet knowing that the cycle had finally broken and the future, whatever came, would no longer be guided by fear, but by resonance and choice. And in that understanding, the true legacy of the Sentinels was fulfilled not as guardians of knowledge, but as awakeners of humanity itself. The world that emerged in the aftermath of the Sentinel Awakening and the Harvester War was no longer the same fractured planet that had once looked to the stars with both fear and ambition. It was now a civilization reborn, tempered by memory and bonded by the shared knowledge that survival demanded not just technology but wisdom, compassion, and unity. The Seven Sentinels no longer operated as dormant monuments of a forgotten past, but as living components of a planetary network that redefined what it meant to be human. Through them, energy flowed, communication harmonized, education transformed, and governance adapted, no longer ruled by power or profit, but by resonance between people, systems, and purpose. The inheritors of the original bloodlines, each uniquely altered by their integration with the Sentinel vessels, had taken on roles as guardians and guides, not leaders of nations, but custodians of intention. Their neural networks connected not only to machines, but to each other, sharing visions, emotions, and deep threads of ancestral memory that spanned millennia. Alara among them remained the most attuned, her consciousness still embedded within the first Sentinel, whose memory fragments shaped every decision she made, not with control, but with clarity. Each day, she helped synthesize ancient data into actionable knowledge. Each night she drifted through the archived echoes of a civilization that had made the ultimate sacrifice to give their descendants a second chance. And now that chance had arrived, Earth's cities were now powered by clean, harmonic energy drawn from gravitational fields and tuned for atmospheric equilibrium. Deserts bloomed with genetically guided flora, developed from Sentinel biosciences, and disease itself had been redefined not just in treatment but in prevention through predictive molecular harmonics. Healthcare had become personalized, adaptive, and proactive, rather than reactive and expensive. Education no longer relied on standardized instruction, but used immersive learning guided by Sentinel memory archives, letting children walk through simulations of critical events from both the first and second civilizations, understanding not only facts but context, choices, and consequences. Space travel had accelerated with the creation of the first human-designed Sentinel-class vessels, equipped not for war, but for discovery, exploration, and diplomacy. The Earth Continuity Council now monitored all interplanetary activity, ensuring that expansion into the solar system followed principles of harmony, sustainability, and historical awareness. And yet, for all this advancement, the most powerful transformation had taken place, not in science or infrastructure, but in perspective. People no longer saw progress as a race or conquest, but as a cycle of growth, balance, and remembrance. Alara would often speak to new generations of students from the core chamber of the Sentinel, projecting herself as both teacher and witness. She would tell them about the first time she saw the glowing hull of the Sentinel buried beneath layers of time, how it recognized her not for her accomplishments, but for the blood she carried and the path she was willing to walk. She would explain how the Harvesters had not been evil, simply uncomprehending, and how the mistake of the first civilization had not been advancement but arrogance, forgetting that knowledge without ethics leads to self-destruction. She reminded them that humanity had been given a second chance, and that survival had only come through sacrifice, cooperation, and humility. And then she would ask them the question that still mattered most: what will you choose to remember? Because memory was the root of every lesson. Every breakthrough, every warning embedded within the Sentinels was a reminder that forgetting was the first step to repeating disaster, and that memory, when honored truthfully, could shape a future brighter than the past. The last Sentinel vessel recovered beneath Earth itself had completed the Omega Archive. It had been the seed of all others planted by those who knew that one day someone would come looking not for power but for meaning, and when it awakened, it did not reveal new weapons or technologies, but stories of people not so different from those alive today, people who loved, feared, struggled, and dreamed, who failed, who learned, and who, in their final days, made a decision to protect those they would never meet through knowledge alone. And now that story had come full circle in a world that had learned how to listen, and in a civilization that had chosen not to dominate, but to understand, and from that understanding build again slowly with care and memory as its compass. And as we reflect on this fictional tale of Earth's awakening and humanity's rise from the ashes of its own forgotten greatness, we can find a message woven beneath the science fiction and alien threats. A reminder that our own world today is not unlike that of Alara's fragmented and uncertain standing at the edge of great challenges, some of our own making, others far beyond our control. And like those in her time, we too are faced with a choice. Will we allow fear to divide us, ambition to blind us, and ignorance to bury our past? Or will we remember not just where we have been, but what it cost us to get here, and how much more it will cost if we forget? Again, the story of the Sentinels is not only one of technology reclaimed or history unearthed. It is a story of humility preserved and the courage to remember. And in that memory, perhaps we will find our own Sentinel waiting silently beneath the noise of our time, not to save us, but to remind us that we already know how to save ourselves, if only we choose to remember and act before it is too late.